Welcome to Factorio. People hate this planet, but I think they're just afraid of new things, and I hope that's true because literally no one warned me that Fulgura was going to make my soul hurt. But now, we research Gleba, and hope it isn't as bad as the people on the internet tell me it is. The game plan is pretty simple. Build a new spaceship with another Hollow member's name, go to and get started on Gleba, make a proper science build, and then come back and upgrade the ribcage. Seems simple, but we'll see if it is. So of course, we research Gleba Discovery and then get right to work on that new spaceship. This one, of course, is called the Fauna Flyer because vegetables. I would explain this ship, but frankly, the only major upgrade I made is the fuel and oxidizer production, so instead you can just live with the time lapse of it being created. I also might make a bigger ship later and I'm saving my ship talk till then, but don't tell anyone. Especially Fauna. But with the ship built and kickstarted, off to Gleba. Step 1 goes by so fast every time. Landing on Gleba, I begin walking around, just breaking whatever I come across. Iron stromatolite? I'll take it. Copper stromatolite? I'll take that too. Find a jelly stream tree thingy? I'll probably need that. And then also run off and find some Yumiko fruits. I will also need those. Then, with the copper and iron I got from the stromatolites, I begin making my starter stuff, as I want to do as much on Gleba as I can. I also go down and break some egg rafts, as I know I'll need some of the pentapod eggs later, and frankly, without any bigger pentapod variants, these are pretty easy to just walk through. I mine a lot of iron stromatolites, just so I can set up my first boilers. But with that, I can set down my first agricultural tower, and start turning the Yumiko from it into copper because I could not figure out what else to do with it in the meantime. And with some seeds given to it, it's kinda working. Now I just need to be able to get stuff in and out of it automatically. But after a while, I set down my first biochamber and begin looking into what I can do with it. Since I want to make more iron and copper, bacteria breeding catches my eye. But for that, I need bioflux, which needs products from both fruits. Since I have a Yumiko tower already, I begin walking over to the nearby purple biome to get some jelly nut. And I basically handcraft my first bioflux with some nutrients from spoilage and my biochamber. With that, I unlock the bacteria cultivation recipe, and then proceed to make a really, really bad Yumiko processing area. Mostly bad due to my currently non-existent jelly, and therefore non-existing bioflux, so I have to use the much, much worse nutrients from mash recipe in it. I then, for some reason, use this to make automated copper bacteria for mash. You know, the bad recipe. Like, I need copper, but taking the time to automate jelly for the proper recipe is so much better because this recipe just sucks. It also immediately starts clogging on spoilage because I set it up very badly, so instead of changing the design or scrapping it, I take the time to set up some inserters to automatically take the spoilage away and into the nutrients from spoilage biochambers. Don't make this. It is bad. Power goes out soon after, and so I set up some fruits to be sent down to burn in the boiler so I don't have to keep hand feeding it. This technically works, however, could be a bad idea because over time this will almost certainly burn enough fruits that I'll run out of seeds, and that's just really bad. I then proceed to stand here and do more or less nothing for a while, besides for hand feeding my furnaces, and while terrible, this setup is by some miracle mostly undeadlocking. That said, I can tell you from looking at it that it would probably break if it stood idle for very long, as the nutrient boxes from spoilage would get clogged with spoilage, and the belt bringing nutrients up to the spoilage to nutrients machines would kinda break the second said biochambers ran out of nutrients. This is also not mentioning that this recipe just sucks, and should never be automated for any reason other than to kickstart the proper recipe. But anyway, my past self makes a hand-fed bioflux setup to, of course, put in a box, because there's nothing that bioflux could be doing right now that would be helpful. Nope, nothing at all. So put in a box to rot it is. Oh wait, no, look here, I use it to make sulfur. Well, at least it won't rot, I guess, but I immediately tear it down because that's just kinda silly. And also tear everything else out soon after, hopefully realizing how bad it was. Running off to a slightly different area, I reset up my steam engine plus radar area, as well as an agricultural tower, this time for jelly nut. It has a whole 3 places to plant, but I'm sure that'll be fine. Next, I get working on my attempt at a bioflux setup. It is, however, overcomplicated, and I'm not sure I remember why this is the strategy I was going for. I was trying to stop it from processing more when there was stuff on the belt, which makes some sense, but the stuff in the middle there can still spoil, so how good it is highly questionable. This high level of questionable gets worse when I use this bioflux to make science packs. Science packs. This is incredibly goofy for a number of reasons, not least of which being my lack of a rocket silo, meaning that even if I automated it properly, it will just rot in a box. Because I can't use it here because I have no other sciences. But here it is, I guess, my first agricultural science build. It has all the hallmarks of an old me Gleba build. It has parts that are overcomplicated for little to no real value. It uses splitters to remove spoilage, which works most of the time except for when it doesn't. And it has a box in the middle of stuff that has no way to get rid of itself in the inevitable spoilage backup, and also no heating tower, and instead just turning spoilage into nutrients and haphazardly shoving them onto a belt. So yeah, agricultural science kinda automated, except I don't have fruits coming in yet, so let's get on that. First is extracting seeds from the mashing plants, and then remembering heating towers exist and getting distracted making concrete. I also set up a train stop on Nauvis for agricultural science that I still can't even try to launch into space. And before finishing automation on before finishing automation on what I was working on, I also make a stone mine for the concrete. To be fair, the concrete will be more useful than the science right now. I run the seeds up and connect them to the jelly tower so that at least this one is fully automated now. And then I take a small break, and by the time I get back to playing the save, I have realized my mistakes and immediately tear the whole build-up. It was useless anyway, so I guess that will count as a win. Also, while taking this break, I had been thinking, and had designed some blueprints. And completely forgot to record designing literally any of them. So that's cool too, I guess. But here is the iron bacteria cultivation stack. It turns fruit into bioflux and uses the bioflux to duplicate iron bacteria. You may also notice that it was designed with a lot of red belts in mind, and you will also notice me not using red belts. Literally anywhere, as I do not have enough iron for that. And also, additionally to that, yes, during my break I managed to forget that you can do the fruit mashing in biochambers, and am instead using assembling machines to do it. So this design is flawed by that alone, but frankly it isn't that terrible otherwise. It does use splitters to get spoilage off, but I also have some inserters shoved in weird places so that if spoilage clogs the belt, but there is something ahead of it stopping it from going down the split path, it will still be taken off. This is also the point where I give up on doing absolutely everything on planet, and for some reason the thing I gave up on was power. Looking back at this, makes no sense, since power is really not that hard to get on Gleba, but whatever, I guess. So yeah, I have Fauna bring me an entire nuclear reactor, and I will have them bring me fuel cells too, because why not, I guess. But anyway, with the iron setup done, I can kinda make it work by hand feeding it, and this does help me get some starting iron ore, however it is obviously not going to work forever. But before dealing with this fruit stuff, I would like to show me getting a ton of power from just residual spoilage from my hand-fed iron stack with a heating tower and a boiler, just to show that I probably did not need to ship in a nuclear reactor, but I did, and it will be built later. However, this one heating tower produces enough electricity that I don't actually build that nuclear reactor for a while. Setting up the Yumiko tree farm is just like the jelly trees, except for it's on an island, so I need a lot of landfill. But I got that stone mine set up earlier, so no big deal. Seeds in, fruits out, and a lot of handcrafted belts from the hand-fed iron stack. But with those belts, it is hand-fed no longer, and now produces iron automatically. Or until it backs up and all of the iron bacteria dies, but let's ignore that for now. I got like 2 whole steel boxes of ore, so it's probably fine. And with that, I move forward to make the whole thing again for copper, as it's just as valuable. And with both set up, that's the most valuable materials technically automated. However, they do both die the second they're backed up, and the bacteria dies. Seeing that issue, I get some recyclers to blast away extra iron ore so that, hopefully, we can always have room for new bacteria, and it will therefore never back up, and therefore should never die. However, due to fruit shortages, we keep running out of bioflux, and they continue to die from that anyway. So, fruit upgrades. Add more towers, more belts, and such. Of course, this middle-of-the-line me has forgotten that they really should be mashing fruits in biochambers, and since they aren't, they are kinda stuck running, at best, a seed-neutral setup. But since I am using some of these seeds to make artificial soil, it is for sure seed negative, adding to me cutting down more natural trees to keep my stock up. However, for now at least it runs. Almost consistently. We are still running out of Yumiko fruit though. Deciding to ignore that and make the issue worse, next stack. I have my copper and I have my iron, but in order to make rockets, I'm gonna need oil products. This planet, however, has no oil. And so this plastic stack, of course, makes the plastic from fruit. Plastic is quite similar to the ore stack, smashing the two fruits, combining the two mashes into bioflux, and then using the bioflux along with some more Yumiko mash to make plastic bars. And of course, sending all the spoilage up to be turned into food for the heating tower. And with that, I move the plastic to the bus. Yep, this is a bus base. And a bus base with a few lines running the wrong way to bring the seeds from the builds back up to the towers. And with plastic, iron, copper, and way too much handcrafting, we can get electric furnaces. These can be used, of course, to make the furnace stacks in front of the ore stacks, so we don't have to keep hand-feeding the stone furnaces I made when I first got here. Also yes, I did in fact handcraft all of the electric furnaces for this. But that gets us fully automatic iron on the bus, so who cares. I then make the copper stack and get it on the bus too. Very nice. And for the next stack, to make the fruit shortage even worse, we have sulfur. Once again, mash the two fruits, make bioflux, and then mix the bioflux with spoilage to get sulfur. To get the spoilage, I just hold some jelly in boxes until it spoils, and then let it go onto the belt to feed their system. I also have to kill more pentapods to make this, which I have had to do a lot of before this point. I just haven't showed it that much because it's pretty much just find nest, shoot the strafers and stompers with your rocket launcher, and try not to die like an idiot. And then the lasers deal with the little guys. As per usual, combat in Factorio really isn't the focus. But with the sulfur stack up, that's pretty much all the raw materials for the rocket. Now I just need to put it together. Now I have sulfur on the bus, and the fruit shortage is kinda impossible to ignore. But anyway, ignoring that, I set up the first rocket component, rocket fuel. Like all the other oil products on Gleba, it's made of fruit. Mash jelly nut into jelly, and Yumiko into Yumiko mash, make bioflux, and mix it with a ton of jelly, as well as some water, and boom. Rocket fuel. And so with that, I shove it into a box to stockpile, because once the fruit is rocket fuel, it doesn't rot anymore. Next, I make a steel stack. Really trying to avoid farming for just a little longer, I guess. Also because it's needed for low density structure, but also probably to avoid farming. It isn't that farming is all that hard, it's just that this version of me still has not figured out that they should be using biochambers to mash their fruit, so seeds are literally their worst nightmare, and expanding farming areas takes a lot of seeds that she just doesn't have. So in other words, it was very annoying, but not because it's difficult, it's just because I'm an idiot. But now we have steel on the bus, and I can make the good old low density structure stack. Super simple. But I can't escape farming forever, so with LDS almost set up, I go over and set up another jelly nut tower. So, after letting seeds back in, because for some reason I stopped them, hopefully the jelly nut should be good for now. Then I actually connect belts to make the LDS, because, you know, that part apparently needed to wait. Then, I stamp down a massive blue circuit blueprint because they are unfortunately necessary for rockets. Also, if you think I'm being vague and not explaining these builds enough, it's because they are not permanent, and I forgot to plan them on video, and you will see my alternative later. But also, I think that this blue circuit build is more or less the same as the one I made on Vulcanus, so like, I explained it before, so it's probably fine. Plugging in all the inputs, I now have blue circuits automated. And yes, this is overbuilt because this would require a dedicated red belt of copper, and my whole base makes one yellow belt. So you know. After getting that set up and stockpiling, I finally slap down the nuclear blueprint, and give the system some of the construction robots to build the thing. And yes, this is literally a copy-paste of the design on NowVis, and also yes, this is in fact the point where I needed more power, I guess. I actually don't think that's true. I'm pretty sure I was still fine on power. I think this is just the time I decided to build the nuclear plant. But let it be known that I did not need to make this, and I don't really know why I did. But I did, so we're living in this universe. While waiting for that to finish, I also try and fix the bug in my design of fauna that was making the two thrusters on the edges not work, and managed to make it still not work because underground pipes can't go over nothing. And that far on a thruster counts as nothing. I do eventually fix it, but I can't find the video of me doing it, so you can have this little video of it working to see how it looks after I really fix it. But yeah, now we have a nuclear plant on Gleba, so no more power issues for me. Once again, not that we were actually having power issues, but this definitely safe holds us for literally forever. And now, a science build. Unfortunately, also designed off camera, but the actual real science build I will do on camera, I promise. That said, bioscience is really not that hard. Just mixing the bioflux we've made a dozen times so far, and pentapod eggs, which are actually kinda scary. See, pentapod eggs just take a pentapod egg, some nutrients, and some water, so in materials it really isn't that different from the bacteria, since bioflux is generally what you're going to be using to make nutrients, since it's just the best recipe. However, as you can imagine, they're a little bit more dangerous. See, pentapod eggs, when they spoil, don't turn into weird green goo or ore like everything else does. No, they turn into pentapods. Very angry pentapods. These pentapods become a danger to everything around them, so while I do have laser turrets in the design, it is highly preferred for them to just not spoil. And so, while they will be constantly produced, if there's more than a certain amount on the belt, they will also be fed into this heating tower to be removed from existence. Said belt is also circular, so there will never be any eggs stationary on the belt. So it shouldn't ever become an issue. However, before actually putting the eggs into the build, there is still a big fruit issue to handle. I did set all the splitters to prioritize moving fruit down to the science, but that causes its own problems and doesn't really fix the original one. Sure, the science probably won't run out of fruit, but now most of the things at the top will never see fruit. And we still just don't have enough, so I really just need to get more. And with all the things above science not receiving fruit, that also means we can't make rockets, and if we can't make rockets, all this science is once again completely useless. First, I make myself a rocket silo because, like I said, I should probably have one of those before finishing science again. I also make this big-ass science buffer for some reason. I don't know what it is with past me making buffers for stuff that spoils, but it doesn't really make sense, and I should really stop doing that. I also start making another farm area down south, and it never really gets used. Like, really, I made this whole farming area, originally planning on using it as a dedicated farming for science, and it does, but this is a temporary build. A very temporary build. So this is also a very temporary farming area. Around this time, however, I finally remember that you can mash fruit in biochambers. However, I do not want to reconfigure all of my stacks, so instead I make the Folly of the Fruit build. A little guy who just sits before everything else on the bus, takes some fruit to mash and self-supply nutrients, and spill seeds back onto the seed belt. So basically, this is the seed farm. Honestly, the seed farm is kinda nice. However, as I work around these things, I start to realize just how bad early game or bacteria farming is, and while I was going for making planets self-sufficient, and I know I can, I have two main reasons for deciding to get rid of the iron and copper stacks. A, it takes a lot of fruit, and farming pre-super flooring is kinda a pain. Plus, I need it for something else. And B, getting it from somewhere else is way easier. However, I did decide not to get it from another planet for a couple reasons. I feel like getting it from them is kinda a pain, and I don't imagine the ore to rocket proportion is that great, and also I had a more fun idea. Setting the request in the landing pad first, I then get to work setting up a new ship. A big one, named Sonolite. This ship has 9 thrusters, and lines of production to fuel them. I also finally redesigned the asteroid chunk processing areas. I make the belt that the asteroid chunks arrive on circular, so it's a lot harder to back up. I also add foundries to this one for the speed and production bonuses that come with it, making the bullet production a bit better. Speaking of bullets, I also make a bullet line split and go to the back while running down both ends instead of being a big loop. That helps because the turrets in the front are going to be used the most, so this way the ones in the front should always be safe from running low on ammo. But, speaking of circular, I do have a circular belt with all the asteroid chunks on it, and I use inserters to pull the chunks onto the circular belts around the processors or onto belts to lead to the processors. And the processors down here at the bottom are special. See, instead of getting iron and copper from a planet, I'll just get it from up here. The sonolite can run back and forth between planets and then just drop iron and copper ore it gets from asteroids down to Gleba when it's there. And yes, once I get some agricultural science in, I can get copper from space too. I also end up pulling the bottom of the ship down a bit further because I did not leave enough space for solar panels. Even with the longer back, it's really not enough anyways, but it's alright enough. Another neat addition I make is that instead of grabbing every asteroid chunk and just tossing the ones I don't need, I set up a circuit condition so that they only grab chunks that they're low on, or chunks that are at least the least common on the belt. Specifically, they will grab chunks that are either under a certain amount, or that number less than or equal to the other two. Lastly, I set it up so it would linger in Gleba orbit if it has a lot of ore already on board, that way it only flies around when it needs to grab more ore. Then, with dropping the ore down, I can just pull it from the landing pad and put it directly onto belts that lead to the furnace stacks. This may seem like overcomplicating things, and it is, but it's an infinite ore with no upkeep as long as I don't mess something up. And most importantly, it leaves fruit open for other things so I don't need to overfarm and clear out every pentapod within 30 miles. I know I said earlier that killing pentapods isn't too bad since I have a rocket launcher, but if a nest has more than a single stomper and strafers too, it turns from easy cleaning to high-risk deathmatch fast, especially as they get bigger. But anyway, officially forgetting about using the farming I made down south, I reattach the science build to the bus fruit to get it working, and then head out to get some eggs to seed the build. So I run down, defeat a nest with a medium strafer, and bring the eggs I got back up. Seething the eggs in the eggs stack, I watch as it gets started, and yeah, it works. And bringing some science to the rocket silo and passing it up to Fauna, I can finally start doing some research again. And of course, I'm gunning for advanced asteroid processing for the copper recipe. However, due to science spoilage, each launch does not give as much as I would have preferred, but it is what it is for now. But after 4 launches, I got the asteroid processing. And with that research, I set up circuits on Sonolite to swap the recipe to copper when the hub is low on copper or there's just less copper than there is iron, which is gonna be most of the time. And so now iron and copper are half produced in space and then dropped to Gleba for cooking. Next, I try and figure out how much science to make. See, in the last videos I made 45 science per second for every science. However, on Gleba, not only is that overkill like it was on other planets, but it is also actively detrimental. See, while it is overkill everywhere else too, builds back up, and then when stuff is needed, it's taken. However, on Gleba, you kinda don't want things to back up, or at least you want to make sure it is very brief if everything does back up, as everything, spoils. So having a super build is not only silly here, but would still eat a ton of fruit and then probably back up on a bunch of spoilage, and science scent would be much more spoiled, and overall it would just kinda suck. I originally thought of solving this in a way that I kind of considered ever since I first heard of the gimmick on Gleba, which is with a super precise build, where each building produces only a specific amount of times, and then just launches all of that down a line into a rocket. However, this thing is obscenely expensive and huge, so this is something that I probably am gonna wait on until I do the later video where I make everything way better. So I spend a bit trying to decide how much to do. And yes, it is not lost on me that I am doing much less on Gleba and will therefore not be able to rank it fairly against the others, but I'm kinda planning on re-ranking all of these in the last episode where I plan on coming back to make all my builds better, and I plan to do another run of Space Age before then so I can get a better view of what the normal play on these planets would look like, where I'm not making stupid arbitrary decisions that make my life 10 times harder for no reason. Like, trying to make 45 science per second on Fulgora without foundations. That being said, spoiler alert, Fulgora is still the only one that pushed for a robot base, so it is still probably going to be the lowest rank, because I hate bot bases. But anyway, I finally decide on making a 7.5 science per second build to start, which is a sixth of my normal because any bigger and the build is gonna get a bit weird. And so I get to building, starting with 2 lines for mashing fruit, and believe it or not, I actually use biochambers for it, so I'll actually have seeds coming from somewhere that isn't the seed farm. The mash and jelly are then brought forward and turned into bioflux, as that is all I need them for. The bioflux is used to make nutrients for the build and is also needed for the science pack itself. Also, while we're at it, I would like to say, when you go to Gleba, people will tell you to fear, and to panic. But really, all you need is a way to clear spoilage on belts, whether by making them circular or using splitters and inserters at the ends. Just have a way to get spoilage gone and you're like 90% of the way there. And also, while this is obviously not something I would do, frankly, Gleba would also be really easy to just bot base, because getting spoilage away is just set all your requester chests to throw away things that they didn't request and they would get rid of it freely. But once again, I'm not making a bot base because bot bases are really boring! Then, anyway, after the nutrients, we have the egg line. Using nutrients, some starting eggs, and water to make infinite eggs forever. This is also around the time that this build becomes suddenly vertical, as doing it horizontal was going to crash into the farming areas. And just past the egg area, we have the chambers for science itself. This has a belt for nutrients, a belt for bioflux, and a belt for eggs too. And of course, science on the sides. Then there's a special part for the egg belt, specifically. The eggs will be immediately burnt in a heating tower after passing the biochambers that use them, so there will be no spoiling for me. Then, with the build done, just have the fruit move up here with priority and feed it some starting nutrients to get it almost started. Last thing is I have to run down and grab some eggs to get it fully started, and then add the offshore pump to give it water because I totally forgot to do that before. Actually, I also add a circuit condition to stop the egg machines from overeating, just to make it a little bit safer. And of course, I route the science all the way down to the rocket silo down here for some reason, and I make an overcomplicated chest thing. Darn you, Gleba buffers. With the science build set up, I get to work setting up some upgrades for the agricultural towers. Specifically, using some imported green belts, I make it so that the agricultural tower has some more space, and make it so that the seeds are delivered by bot, since the few logistic bots I imported just really don't have much else to do. While doing this, I also added another tower for Yumikos, since I'm permanently behind on those red fruits. After doing that, I see how long it's taking to do literally any research, and decide it's time for a pit stop at Nauvis. I grab some bioflux to send with me, put everything else away, and send that bioflux up to the Sonolite to bring up to Nauvis, and soon after, send myself up as well. Arriving on Nauvis, I make a bunch of large power poles and grab a bunch of roboports, running a precarious line of power poles up towards this island I can see with some biters still on it, and set a radar up to scan it while I run back to grab some landfill to bridge over to the island. Then, through the power of filterable turrets, I make some turrets that will blow up anything they see except the nests, and then deploy those to clear out the danger so I can walk over and place more turrets to deal with anything that continues to spawn. With those turrets in place, I throw down some capture rockets I made with the bioflux I sent, and just kill the remaining spawners. And then proceed to very much overfeed them and take back a lot of the bioflux I gave them, probably not remembering that biter eggs don't spoil inside the nest. But anyway, I queue the research for biolabs and overgrowth soil, and will actually use one of these. With the few eggs I brought with me back to the ribcage, I handcraft some biolabs for myself, leaving the excess eggs just over here in the safety rectangle. Then, dismantling the old science for the most part, I begin setting up pretty much the exact same thing but with biolabs. I will say that this lab design functions, but put massive quotes around functions. Daisy chaining all your labs together does in fact work. However, all of your science becomes limited by the speed of your inserters, and trust me, after chaining like 12 labs, it becomes noticeable. So having all your labs like this is just kinda silly. However, for now it works, and that's all I really need for now. Plus, biolabs are just really good. They do just about everything better, except they do have a hefty pollution cost. But pollution is nothing a few gun turrets and being 90 miles from anyone that would notice won't fix. I also set up some belts and inserters, so in case that any agricultural science spoils, it will be automatically removed and burnt. Now, for some reason, is me properly giving up on Gleba industry, I guess. Starting off with making a copy of Sonolite called Sonolite B. And you know how I'm making rocket parts on Gleba? Well, not anymore. See, Fulgora is trash, but it produces rocket parts so easy. So I set up Sonolite B to pick up rocket parts from Fulgora and just bring them to Gleba. Is this kinda cringe? Absolutely, it is. Once again, this is why I'm going to need to play through Space Age again to have a more objective rating of all the planets. But back on Gleba, the science build is dead, and after looking at it for a while, I realize it's because we're backed up on seeds. So I just throw down a heating tower that will eat seeds when we have a certain amount of seeds already on the belt, effectively making it so that they only burn seeds when we're backed up. I also removed pretty much all the production here on Gleba because I decided shipping in was better, which objectively it is, but also I feel like kinda ruins the point of what I was doing. But I also get rid of the extra farming area I made down south, which I guess is a good thing because I don't know why that was still down there, because I pretty much never used it. One objectively good thing I do, though, is finally fixing the odd decision to send the agricultural science like all the way down here, and instead I set up the silo at the top of the science stack so it has to travel pretty much no distance at all, and therefore I can ship a more fresh product up to space. I also around this time have to save fauna from death by meteor, because this design is kinda bad. Especially this asteroid processor, just look at it. It backed up because I designed it very badly. Sorry, fauna, I'll improve it later, I promise. Some turrets still ran out of ammo for a bit, but the boat lives, so it's okay. With Gleba now getting most of its supplies from elsewhere, Sonolite A is kinda useless now, and that makes me sad. So a new job it needs. I make some new concrete, and I make a new rocket silo. This silo is fed by Requester and is used to send bioflux into space, and this bioflux is caught by Sonolite A to be brought to Nauvis. But what after getting to Nauvis? Well, before we get to that, I finally remember to set up roboports up to that little island with the biter nests on it, because yeah, I completely forgot to do that. Back next to the slightly angry nests, I set up an assembling machine to make some capture bot rockets automatically, this being the first thing I will be using the bioflux for. Next, I begin plotting out more biolabs, continuing the bad design because designing a new, better one is apparently just too hard right now. Next, I use my capture rockets to recapture the nests and use requester chests to automatically feed them bioflux so they don't get mad at me again. Then, first automation with biter eggs. By this time, I've learned that the eggs do not start spoiling until they're removed from the nest. Due to this, I set up a decider combinator and a bunch of signals short. It makes it so that the inserter only pulls eggs into the assembler for biolabs when it already has everything else to make the lab in it, and does not already have any eggs in it. This way, the only eggs that are taken out are to be instantly used, leaving no gaps for egg spoilage to happen. And of course, with how fast it makes these eggs, I also realize that I don't really need these other nests, and that they are more in the way than helpful for this level of production. So I focus on this one and just kill the other ones. And with that, I have fully automatic biolabs. It is somewhat unfortunate that they are made all the way up here, but I can't move the nests yet, so it'll have to do. I also extend the lab chain some more, because why not, I guess? It's not like the daisy chain gets more and more dysfunctional as it gets longer. I promise I do actually make a better lab design later. But right now this works enough, and while a bit inconsistent in rate, it works at about 110 to 120 science per minute, so not too bad I guess, but it could be a lot better. After this, I make a very similar automation setup as the biolabs, this time productivity module 3s, because those are maybe gonna be handy later, and then immediately realize that the labs are kinda terrible, and it's time to reset that trash. I let it research as much as it can after disconnecting it from any new science, and after that I tear down the terrible science build. After that is belt spaghetti time. Also yes, I did not notice that I messed something up here. Specifically, I don't have enough belt speed for most of my science, but I'm gonna have to remake this entire base at some point. Also, belt spaghetti is messy as it is because I decided to set it up in chromatic order. And then, the actual science build. It has 5 belts running under the labs, and 1 running alongside, all holding science. Additionally, there's another side belt that takes all the spoilage and brings it to burn. After that, more labs putting them in a line until a rail interferes, then turning it around and going back. So now instead of a daisy chain lab, we have zigzag labs. There's also a single beacon affecting each lab, which will have speed mods in them eventually, and once I have enough productivity module 3s, those are going in the labs too. However, at this point, I am running behind on agricultural science, so it's time to expand it. I head back to Gleba, doubling the science build up to 15 science per second. Fortunately, I built it pretty much as just a tall semi-even line, so I can just paste a second copy right next to it. And when I get this second copy finished, I also set up its own rocket silo, deciding each line is going to have its own for increased throughput to space. Now, rounding things up, I just start by expanding the labs again, adding another couple lines. Then I set up some speed module 2 automation real quick, as I should really set something up in the beacons. And lastly, I research Aquilo. Yeah, there might be a couple more things I could automate, but I also really want to get this video done, as I've been working on it for way too long. And I think this is about everything I need for this episode. I know I said I can't make a super fair ranking of the planets, as I have not done everything the same. That said though, I kinda like Gleba actually. I will say it is pretty much for sure the most actually difficult, but that being said, I think all of the challenges are pretty fair and reasonable, and while spoilage is a thing, frankly dealing with it isn't as hard as people keep saying. If something spoils on the belt, just take it off the belt. It's really not that complicated, and with how people were talking about it before I got here, I was a lot more concerned about it, but it really isn't that hard to deal with as long as you have a little bit of forethought in your design. As for being difficult, I found the hardest part is really just the farming. Finding and setting up areas to get the fruit that isn't too far away from each other so it isn't too spoiled by the time it gets to where the production is can be a little annoying, but that being said, looking back on it, I could have solved a lot of this by A, using faster belts, B, using trains, or C, even just using logistic robots to get them closer. Also, as per usual, a lot of my issues probably could have been alleviated, or at least very much less bad, if I would remember to actually use modules, like literally ever. I don't know why, but I feel like 90% of the time I play through Factorio, I just kinda forget to use modules until the very end. Maybe I'll remember to use them next episode on Aquilo, but I suppose we'll just have to wait and see about that. And so for now, Gleba is an A-class planet. It is unique, interesting, and a new challenge. And best of all, it does not make me make a bot base. But anyway, until we go to Aquilo, I'm heading out. So for now, farewell.